When you join the military, you join for adventure, you join for paycheck, you join for the experience. But what happens after? The unfortunate truth is that one day you gotta take off the uniform and you have to go back into the civilian world. You're gonna be competing for things like a new job, money, and success. So today, I'm gonna be breaking down which branch sets up its enlisted members the most for after service. I've analyzed over 50 research reports, y'all. From the RAND Corporation, from the US Census Bureau, from Pew, the DoD, and the VA. I then scored each branch, including the Air Force, the Army, the Space Force, the Marines, and the Navy. I'm sorry, Coast Guard, once again, I had to leave you out. I'm sorry, it's just too little data to report on. We're gonna be grading them on how they align you for your civilian job. I'm gonna be breaking this down into 3 different categories, each for 10 points apiece for a total of 30 points. These categories are going to be the education you received before separation. It's going to be how your job aligns to the civilian world. And then we're going to look into hardship and poverty after service. I also tried to break this down into enlisted tiers like E1 through E4, E5 through E6, and E7 through E9. Some of the data is real hard to compute to be that specific, but I tried. So you'll see sometimes I do it and sometimes I just can't. This is the most honest, uncomfortable, and valuable video out there. I'm not doing it so I can trash another branch. I just think that this is pertinent research when you're making your decision to join. So let's talk about education first. You hear all the time that you get your education when you join the military. This is true because each one of the branches, you're entitled some tuition assistance when you join. However, the likelihood of using that tuition assistance is different between the branches. So we're gonna break that down. So we're gonna start with the Marines. The Marines allow you to use your tuition assistance pretty soon, actually. After you complete all your training, as long as you get your supervisor's approval, you can start using your tuition assistance. However, the Marines are the branch that uses the tuition assistance the least. And the reason is because they deploy a lot and it's just not a thing that's part of the culture for the Marines. They're more about toughness, they're more about their deployment. So that being said, E1 through E4, 1.1% of Marines have an associate's degree, 0.9% have completed their bachelor's, and 0% have any advanced degrees. When you start looking into E5 through E6, this starts picking up a little bit. 4.4% of them have an associate's degree, 3.6% of them have a bachelor's degree, and 0.4% of them have an advanced degree. As you move up into the senior non-commissioned officer ranks, E7 through E9, it gets better. 10.6% of them have an associate's degree, 16.4% of them have a bachelor's degree, and 4.4% of them have an advanced degree. The Marines have fewer graduation degrees than any other branch. So with that being said, I have to give them a 5 out of 10 for their education while serving. Now, the Navy has some weird tuition assistance rules of when you can actually use it. They say that you have to wait 3 years until you're eligible to use your tuition assistance. That's the longest out of any branch. But with that being said, their E1 through E4 have a higher percentage of people with degrees than the Marines. I'm assuming it's because they have time to actually go to school. So 3.1% of E1 through E4 have an associate's degree, 4.3% have a bachelor's degree, and 0.3% have an advanced degree. We're talking like masters or doctorates. When you move up into the NCO tier, E5 through E6, 9.5% of them have an associate's degree, 9.5% of them have a bachelor's degree, and 1.2% of them have an advanced degree. As you move up into the senior NCO ranks, 17.9% of them have an associate's degree, 18% of them have a bachelor's degree, and 5% of them have an advanced degree. So with that being said, I gotta give the Navy a 7 out of 10 for their education. Next, we move into the Army. The Army, just like the Marines and like the other branches besides the Navy, you can start using your tuition assistance right away. However, you gotta get that supervisor approval. Now, the Army actually has some good percentages with their education while serving. E1 through E4, 2.6% of them have an associate's degree, 4.8% of them have a bachelor's degree, and 0.5% of them have an advanced degree. As you move up into the NCO tier, E5 through E6, 8.5% of them have an associate's degree, 10.3% of them have a bachelor's degree, and 1.2% of them have an advanced degree. Then, when we get into the senior NCO tier, 16.3% of them have an associate's degree, 21.1% of them have a bachelor's degree, and 7% of them have an advanced degree. That being said, I gotta give the Army an 8 out of 10 for their education, but none of them compare to the Air Force and the Space Force. We're going to get into them now. The Air Force, which used to come in number 1, is going to take second place here. So the Air Force, everyone knows they pride themselves on education. Matter of fact, they're the only branch that is a community college. So all the training you go through in the Air Force is actually accredited. And this really helps with their percentages for people who have completed school. So for the junior enlisted ranks, E1 through E4, 2.3% of them have an associate's degree, 2.8% of them hold a bachelor's degree, and 0.2% hold an advanced degree. It's not until you move up into the NCO ranks when you see a drastic difference between them and the other branches. 31.6% of them have an associate's degree, 13.7% of them have a bachelor's degree, and 2% of them have an advanced degree. Realistically, as you start moving up in the ranks in the Air Force, you really can't move up unless you start getting your education. And it really shows when you get into the senior NCO ranks. E7 through E9, 40.6% of them hold an associate's degree, 36.8% of them hold a bachelor's degree, and 15.4% of them hold an advanced degree. When I say 40% holds an associate's degree, what I mean by that is that's the highest degree that they hold. They don't hold anything higher. And then you have the Space Force. Now the Space Force, just like the Air Force, they have the community college of the Air Force, but since all their jobs are like highly technical, highly prestigious jobs, their education jumps through the roof. E1 through E4, 3.5% of them hold an associate's degree, 5.8% of them hold a bachelor's degree, and 0.3% hold an advanced degree. When you move up into the NCO tier, 27.6% of them hold an associate's degree, 16.9% of them hold a bachelor's degree, and 3.8% hold an advanced degree. And then their senior NCO tier, E7 through E9, 30.8% of them hold an associate's degree, 39.2% of them hold a bachelor's degree, and 17.9% of them hold an advanced degree. So the Air Force, I had to give them a 9 out of 10, and the Space Force, I got to give them a 10 out of 10 for their education. So this education not only helps them while they serve, but when they get out, this education helps them transfer into their civilian job, along with the actual job that they did while they served. The next part of this is we're gonna break down which one of these branches align your job into the civilian world the best. Now, in doing this, it was really hard for me to really narrow it down because there's so many different jobs and not every job is equal. But what I did realize is that some branches have more jobs that translate into the civilian world better than others. So I'm gonna start with the Army. Now the Army has some very wide extremes. You got everything from infantry, and then they also have some intelligence and cyber jobs. And this really skews the data for what you can expect in the civilian world after leaving the Army. So in E1 through E5, I couldn't do E1 through E4, I just couldn't find that data. But in E1 through E5, because the jobs are so wide, you can expect to make anywhere from $22,000 a year to $46,000 a year. But then when you start looking into E6 through E9, they start to fare a little bit better. The reason why is because they have leadership, they usually have more education, and they usually have more experience. So what you're gonna see is that through all the branches, their E6 through E9 tend to make a lot more money than the E1 through E5. That being said, the Army's E6 through E9 can expect to make about anywhere from $55,000 a year to $70,000 a year. And this is after their first year of separating. The numbers tend to rise as you go to 5 years, as you tend to go 10 years after separation. But after that first year of separation, that's what you can expect to make. After 5 years, an E1 through E5 can expect to make anywhere from $29,000 to $61,000 a year. And then an E6 through E9 can expect to make anywhere from $47,000 a year to $93,000 a year. Something else I saw is that the veteran unemployment rate is statistically lower than the nation's average. The nation's average unemployment rate right now, I believe, is 3.9%, and the veterans unemployment rate is 3%. So overall, veterans are finding job opportunities better than civilians, and that's across all branches. I had to give the Army a 7 out of 10 for its job alignment into the civilian world. Next, we're gonna look at the Navy. The Navy also has a wide extreme of jobs. They have jobs where you're just painting ships or washing clothes, and they also have jobs where you're working with nuclear stuff. So when you're looking at the E1 through E5, you can expect to make anywhere from $24,000 a year to $53,000 a year. And then when you make it to E6 through E9, you could expect to make anywhere from $42,000 a year to $87,000 a year. Remember, this is after your first year of separation. After 5 years of separation, E1 through E5, you can expect to make about $32,000 a year to $68,000 a year. And if you're E6 through E9, you can expect to make around $50,000 to $98,000 a year. So I had to give the Navy a 9 out of 10 for their job alignment into the civilian world. Next, surprisingly, was the Marines. I always thought that the Marines, because of their limited job opportunities while serving, didn't make that much money on the outside. But what I learned is that the Marines have so much leadership that they provide to their troops that this translates well into the civilian world. I saw some additional data that most of them don't get to take advantage of the opportunities like SkillBridge on the way out the door. This program allows you to start working as an internship for a company before you actually get out of the service, and usually lines you up a job before you separate. The Marines aren't usually privy to this because they're the few, they're the proud. They don't really have too many people to fill your position while you're going through SkillBridge. That being said, if you're a Marine and you get out within your first year, you can expect to make around $25,000 to $51,000 a year if you're an E1 through E5, or $41,000 to $87,000 a year if you're an E6 through E9. After 5 years, this is when it really starts to look good for the Marines. An E1 through E5 can expect to make around $35,000 to $70,000 a year, and an E6 through E9 can expect to make around $52,000 to $100,000 a year. This is really going to depend on the job that you got lined up with. I really think that there's a cult out there of Marines in high places, and when they find out that you're a prior Marine, you're getting job opportunities before the next man. I really think that's a thing. I had to give the Marines a 9 out of 10. Now, the Air Force and Space Force, I had them as number 1 because most of their jobs translate into the civilian world. As a matter of fact, there was a study done by the Census Bureau, and it shows that Air Force members tend to work in more prestigious type of jobs, and they tend to make more money. They show that if you work in the federal government with Air Force experience, you're gonna make more than the other branches and other career fields like professional and technical careers. Now, the numbers are also skewed a little bit because the research showed that Air Force members, when they get out, they tend to not work right away because they actually go and use their post 9/11 GI Bill and enhance their education before they go into the workforce. That being said, if you're an E1 through E5, you can expect to make around $25,000 to $60,000 a year. If you're an E6 through E9 after your first year, you can expect to make around $44,000 to $88,000 a year. After 5 years, if you're an E1 through E5, you can expect to make around $35,000 to $76,000 a year. And if you're an E6 through E9, you can expect to make around $54,000 to $98,000 a year. That's for both the Air Force and the Space Force. So for both of them, I got to give them a 10 out of 10 for their job alignment into the civilian world. Now, I said earlier that the unemployment rate for veterans is lower than the national average, but there's still this perception that military members are homeless and live in poverty. So I wanted to look into that too for each branch. Now, what I did realize is that over the years, like from the 70s to now, that trend of poverty and homelessness has declined significantly. But there's still a chance because of things like PTSD and mental health. There's still people who fall victim to this. So we're gonna break it down. Now, I just broke this up into 2 different categories. I kept the Army and the Marines together because both of them have an infantry, and their infantry see things that maybe some of the other branches don't. This significantly impacts them for PTSD and mental health, and that stuff can always impact somebody negatively, especially without the proper care. The Army actually makes up the largest percent of homeless vets, and I see that as they're the largest branch as well, so it's only fitting that the math works that way. But them and the Marines, I had to give them a 7 out of 10 for the possibility and likelihood to see homelessness and poverty after serving. I kept the Space Force, the Air Force, and the Navy together. And the reason why I did this is because they don't really have an infantry, but there's always the possibility to have PTSD or mental health issues because of things you've seen while serving. That being said, you're far more less likely to see that kind of stuff serving in one of those branches. So for that, I had to give them a 9 out of 10 for the possibility of poverty and homelessness after service. Something else I also discovered is that ranks E1 through E5 tend to struggle with this a lot more than the ranks of E6 through E9. You rarely see ranks of E6 through E9 dealing with any type of poverty or homelessness outside of their service. But the ones E1 through E5, maybe they didn't get enough skills, maybe they didn't get enough education to where they deal with that stuff outside of service. But that being said, we gotta tally them all up. Coming in last place is gonna be the Marines with a score of 21 out of 30. The Army's gonna come next with a score of 22 out of 30. Then you have the Navy with a score of 24 out of 30. And then the Air Force comes in second place with a score of 28 out of 30. And the Space Force comes in first place with a score of 29 out of 30. Now, a lot of the issues that can prevent someone from having that success after service is just not knowing how to take care of themselves financially, like their credit score. If you have no idea what you should be doing to maintain a credit score or increase it, I got a video on the screen right now of how my 18-year-old son has a credit score of 740 something on his 18th birthday. But like I always say, I hope this video brought value to you. Stay beautiful, stay classy, and until next time, check me out.